Ibrahim Traoré. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't wait for approval. He acted. While others debated policies in comfortable offices, he faced down the weight of empires and chose a different path. One paved with dust, blood, and determination. The headlines in Washington read "Strategic Pivot," but on the streets of Ouagadougou, the people called it liberation. The withdrawal of American power wasn't just a policy change, it was the collapse of a narrative. One where Africa was always the recipient, never the author. That story has changed. For decades, the United States operated under the illusion of indispensability, that it could drop in aid when convenient, deploy troops when necessary, and retreat without consequence. But those days are over. Today, Africa isn't waiting to be told what to do. It's already doing it. As President Trump quietly pulled back from the continent, closing bases, cutting aid, issuing no explanations, he believed he was reclaiming efficiency, but in reality, he surrendered relevance. No banners were raised, no parades marked the retreat. Instead, a silence spread, a silence that spoke louder than any press release. Africa did not panic. Africa did not plead. It adapted. And perhaps that is the greatest humiliation of all. Not outrage, not protest, but indifference. In Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré looked beyond old alliances and asked a different question. What does sovereignty truly mean if it depends on foreign boots? And with that, he turned away from the West, not in defiance, but in clarity. Russia listened, China built, Turkey offered. In Africa, Africa negotiated, not as a subordinate, but as a partner. It was never about hating the United States. It was about no longer needing it. What many in Washington failed to grasp is that relevance cannot be assumed. It must be earned, sustained, and respected. Trump thought his absence would cause disorder. Instead, it revealed a truth. America had already lost the room. The White House expected its withdrawal to send shockwaves, but the ground did not shake. Governments across Africa responded not with alarm, but with realignment. Ghana looked east. Kenya opened to the Gulf. South Africa anchored deeper into BRICS. These weren't betrayals. They were calculations. Rational choices made in the absence of trust. Now ask yourself this. If America's presence didn't prevent insurgency, didn't stabilize economies, didn't empower independence, what exactly was it offering? African leaders began to see the facade, the high-level conferences with low-level outcomes, the promises lost in election cycles, the aid tied with conditions no sovereign nation could accept without shame. And so, Ibrahim Traoré and his generation chose something else. A harder road, yes, a riskier one, perhaps, but their own. When the U.S. closed its drone base in Niger, it affected desperation. What it got was decisiveness. Local forces turned to new allies. Questions were asked aloud. If America's drones couldn't stop the bloodshed, why were they there at all? This was the revelation. The myth of Western indispensability had cracked. African commanders, once constrained by red tape and slow-moving bureaucracy, began building regional pacts, sourcing equipment without lectures, and forging tactics that worked for their terrain, not for Washington's agenda. Do you feel it? The shift. The silence of America isn't just absence. It's irrelevance creeping into global affairs like fog over an abandoned battlefield. And in that space, Traoré emerged, not as a puppet of Moscow or a client of Beijing, but as a symbol of what post-imperial Africa could become. Stay tuned. The story continues. There was a time when just the idea of U.S. withdrawal from any region would send politicians scrambling, trigger emergency summits, and spark debates in parliaments. But when America backed away from Africa, this time nothing happened. No one begged, no one wept, no one called for rescue. In fact, most leaders didn't even blink. That silence was not peace. It was power shifting. And Traoré understood it better than most. He watched as American soldiers packed up and left, not because the mission was accomplished, but because interest had evaporated. That's the price of inconsistency. The continent had seen this before, with France, with Britain, with every power that came claiming to bring order and left when profits waned. What made this different was how quickly Africa filled the void. In Niger, military leadership wasted no time. Russian advisors landed. Drone technology was rerouted. Security contracts reimagined. There were no long delays, no drawn-out appeals to Washington, just swift, bold action. America had expected its absence to cripple these governments, but it did the opposite. It revealed their independence. For years, African nations had played along, attending global conferences, following aid conditions, hosting military bases. But under the surface, frustration was growing. The weapons were late, the strategies outdated, the promises shallow. So when the pullback came, they didn't grieve. They adapted. Ibrahim Traoré wasn't just reacting, he was planning. He understood that loyalty built on dependency was not loyalty at all. Burkina Faso began investing in local defense structures. Alliances were reshaped, trade routes redirected. A vision emerged, one where Africa would no longer be the terrain of others' ambitions, but the ground of its own destiny. This was the part the West never anticipated, not chaos, not collapse, but coordination. Yes, violence still haunted parts of the Sahel. Yes, insurgents remained a threat, but the narrative had changed. It was no longer about pleading for outside help. It was about taking back control. You see, when the US left, they assumed they were leaving a vacuum. What they missed was that the vacuum had already been there long before the retreat. All they did was expose it. In this new landscape, credibility is king. Not just who shows up, but who stays. Not who brings the most money, but who listens the most carefully. America under Trump failed that test. Inconsistency became its brand. And once a partner becomes unreliable, they stop being a partner at all. Ibrahim Traoré's rise isn't just political, it's symbolic. He represents a generation that no longer waits for validation from Washington or Paris. They speak in different languages now, the language of self-respect, local resilience, and quiet strength. This is not the Africa of old textbooks. This is not the Africa portrayed in headlines. This is a continent remembering its power and wielding it with purpose. Stay with us as we dive deeper. They called it strategic withdrawal, but what it really was surrender. Not the kind signed in a treaty or sealed in defeat, but the quiet surrender of influence, of presence, of respect. America didn't lose a war in Africa. It lost something more valuable: relevance. As the world watched, Ibrahim Traoré took that moment and turned it into momentum. He didn't fill the gap with foreign flags or flashy alliances. He filled it with purpose, with planning, with a message. We don't need a savior. We need space to lead ourselves. Western policymakers continued to believe Africa could not move without Western permission. They believed their absence would cause panic, but panic never came. Instead, something else emerged: clarity. In Accra, in Bamako, in Nairobi, leaders began speaking differently. Less about what the US might offer, more about what they could do without it. That's the irony of Trump's exit. It revealed the truth everyone suspected but few dared to say aloud. The American footprint was already faint. The drone bases, the training programs, the embassies, they gave the illusion of control. But when tested, that control crumbled. And Traoré? He stepped over the debris and moved forward. Burkina Faso didn't collapse. It consolidated. It didn't wait for new instructions. It wrote its own. The formation of the Alliance of Sahel States wasn't just about security, it was about sovereignty. It said, loud and clear, we will no longer outsource our stability. Russia may have provided support, China may have built infrastructure, but the terms were African, the conditions were local. That's what scared the old powers most. Not that Africa turned east, but that it stopped looking west. And here's something few in Washington are willing to admit. For decades, America offered stability with strings attached, aid with lectures, protection with a price. But when African leaders weighed the results, they found them lacking. The insurgencies continued. The economy struggled. The people waited. So they stopped waiting. Now you see leaders who don't beg for meetings in Western capitals. They host summits of their own. They draw up agreements that fit their context, not someone else's checklist. Ibrahim Traoré isn't just navigating this new terrain, he's shaping it. Under his leadership, Burkina Faso is no longer a client state. It's a voice, firm, proud, and unafraid to reject outdated models. His decisions aren't always comfortable for outsiders, but they are consistent with one principle: self-determination. That's why his message resonates beyond his borders. It speaks to millions across Africa who have grown tired of being treated like perpetual students in a classroom they built. They want partners, not patrons. Respect, not rescue. And this shift is happening faster than many predicted. Across the continent, youth are tuning out legacy news channels and tuning into local voices. They share stories on encrypted chats, challenge assumptions in real time, and elevate leaders like Traoré, not because they're perfect, but because they're present. America, by contrast, has become a shadow, occasionally visible, rarely dependable. And the lesson being learned in capitals from Dakar to Addis Ababa is this: never depend on a power that can vanish overnight. That doesn't mean alliances are dead. It means trust has conditions. Stay consistent, stay committed, or stay out. And Africa is no longer the geopolitical child of the global system. It is not waiting for permission. It is building alternatives. And while some may still dismiss this as temporary, they will be left behind. Because what Traoré and others are building isn't rebellion, it's renewal. Quiet, steady, and unstoppable. And if you're watching this and wondering where the world goes from here, keep watching. This isn't the end of a chapter, it's the beginning of a new book. Subscribe now to keep turning the pages with us. The most dangerous enemy isn't the one that attacks, it's the one that forgets you exist. And that is exactly what happened to the United States in Africa. They didn't fall in a firefight. They faded into silence. That silence wasn't peace, it was Africa learning to breathe without the West. And Ibrahim Traoré, he wasn't begging to be noticed. He was busy leading. For too long, global powers treated Africa like a pawn in someone else's game. Aid came with lectures, security came with oversight, trade came with traps. And all the while, African leaders were expected to smile and say thank you. But something shifted. With America gone, the curtain was pulled back. The continent could finally see who was really in charge, and who never was. The old model, where Washington or Paris drew up the strategy and African nations followed, is dying. In its place is something far more unpredictable and far more powerful: African decision-making. Across the continent, from west to east, leaders are no longer asking, "What does America want?" They're asking, "What works for us?" And that question is changing everything. In Ethiopia, deals with China are signed in, not because of loyalty, but because of leverage. In Mali, foreign troops are shown the door, not out of hostility, but out of necessity. And in Burkina Faso, Traoré is proving that independence isn't about isolation, it's about options. America's greatest mistake wasn't leaving. It was assuming its presence still mattered, that it could withdraw without consequence, that its silence would echo like thunder. But the echo never came. Instead, it was drowned out by the sound of African ambition. Schools rebuilt with local funds, roads constructed without Western blueprints, militias pushed back not with drones, but with determination. And while the West debates whether Africa is turning toward Russia or China, the truth is far simpler. Africa is turning toward itself, and this movement isn't fueled by propaganda. It's fueled by memory. The memory of promises made and broken. The memory of treaties signed, then forgotten. The memory of wars fought in the name of others. Traoré stands at the center of this reckoning. He didn't create the frustration, he gave it a face. He didn't start the movement, he gave it momentum. And perhaps most importantly, he did something few leaders dare to do. He trusted his people. He spoke their language. He shared their fears. He carried their anger. And in doing so, he became more than a president. He became a mirror, reflecting everything the old world refused to see. That's why his rise scares so many in Washington. Not because he is hostile, but because he is free. Because he has proven that a nation like Burkina Faso, with few resources and constant threats, can still make its own way. That's a dangerous idea in a world built on dependence, and it's spreading. Across African capitals, politicians are listening more to their citizens and less to foreign embassies. They're measuring success not in GDP growth charts made in Europe, but in the stability of their own streets. This is not to say the road is easy or perfect, but it is their road. And once a people believe in their ability to walk it alone, there is no turning back. Now ask yourself, is this the beginning of a break from the West? Or is it the birth of something larger, a new way of seeing the world? Ibrahim Traoré may not have all the answers, but he's asking the right questions. And that makes him one of the most important voices of our time. If you've been moved by this story, let us know in the comments. Do you believe Africa is better off choosing its own path? Subscribe and share your thoughts. Trump thought walking away from Africa would be a power move, that leaving the table would make the rest of the world chase him, but the table didn't flip. It simply got bigger. And now new players are seated: Russia, China, Turkey, and more importantly, Africa itself. The rules have changed, the language has changed, and the US is no longer at the head. What Trump didn't realize was that by stepping back, he wasn't commanding attention. He was forfeiting influence. In this vacuum, Africa didn't fall apart. It adapted. Traoré didn't stand on stages demanding aid. He sat at strategy meetings with local leaders drafting policies on their terms. This wasn't rebellion, it was responsibility. This wasn't desperation, it was design. For the first time in generations, Africa is negotiating not from a position of need, but of choice. That's what makes this moment historic. In Ethiopia, economic deals are balanced against sovereignty. In Senegal, Gulf-funded economic zones operate beside local governance. In South Africa, BRICS is not a loyalty oath, it's a bargaining chip. This is the nuance global powers still don't understand. Africa isn't choosing sides, it's choosing leverage. And leverage means power. That power isn't always loud. It doesn't need to be. Because now African states are playing the long game. They're not chasing headlines, they're building frameworks. Pan-African trade corridors, digital currencies, shared security alliances like the AES. These are no longer dreams. They are becoming the foundation of a new era. An era that isn't controlled from outside boardrooms, but from local communities. It is in this environment that Ibrahim Traoré shines. His leadership doesn't seek applause from the West, it seeks approval from his people. And that's what terrifies the old world order. Not that Africa is rising, but that it no longer looks west when it does. Traoré's speeches aren't designed for CNN soundbites. They're designed for the streets of Ouagadougou, for the radio stations in villages, for the youth scrolling through WhatsApp in the back of a classroom. That's where the new power lies, in voices that echo in local dialects, not foreign policy briefings. And that's where the West is losing, not in battles but in belief. Once, African youth waited for outside validation. Now they shape the narrative themselves. And when they look for leaders, they don't always look to presidents. They look to those who listen, who stay, who don't make promises just to break them. In that space, Traoré doesn't stand alone. He is joined by a generation of thinkers, teachers, and technologists who are done asking permission. They are reclaiming education, rewriting history, and demanding media that reflects their truth. Africa isn't quiet anymore. It's just speaking a language the old world refuses to hear. And while Trump stands outside, wondering why the door won't open, Africa is building a new house entirely, one that doesn't need his key. The question is no longer whether the US will return. The question is, what does return even mean when you were never fully present to begin with? If you've been following Traoré's journey in the continent's transformation, hit that like button and subscribe. Let us know in the comments. Should Africa ever look back, or is it time to move forward without waiting? By now, even Trump's closest strategists must be wondering, can the US still get back in, or has Africa changed the locks for good? The silence from African leaders speaks louder than any press briefing. There are no fiery condemnations, no urgent appeals for America's return. That silence is not indifference, it's decision, a decision to move on. Because this isn't the Africa of 20 years ago. This is a continent that has seen what inconsistency looks like. It has learned that American support often depends on who wins the next election. That stability is not guaranteed. That presence does not equal partnership. Biden tried to patch the cracks, but the damage went deeper than one administration. African leaders began to ask, how can we trust a country where every agreement can be undone overnight, where promises vanish with a tweet? That realization changed everything. Trust was no longer given, it had to be earned, again. And Ibrahim Traoré made it clear. Burkina Faso isn't interested in fair-weather friendships. His foreign policy is not shaped in embassies. It's forged in the fields, on the front lines, and in the hearts of his citizens. That's where his power comes from. Not from alliances, but from alignment with his people. Meanwhile, across the continent, others are following suit. In West Africa, the AES alliance coordinates military operations independently. In East Africa, infrastructure is being built without a single Western blueprint. In Southern Africa, rare earth minerals are no longer being handed out to the highest Western bidder. Instead, new deals prioritize local benefit. What does this mean? It means the idea of Africa needs the West is being replaced by a new philosophy. Africa needs itself. And that philosophy is spreading in schools, in songs, in speeches. It's not anti-American. It's pro-African. And that's a distinction many in the West still refuse to understand. When Traoré rejects foreign troops, it's not hostility, it's healing. When he questions development contracts, it's not rebellion, it's responsibility. And when he calls for unity across African borders, it's not fantasy, it's a future being built brick by brick. America had the chance to be part of that future, but instead of adapting, it withdrew. And when it left, it didn't leave behind a hole. It left behind a message that Africa must be ready to stand alone. That message, while painful, became powerful. Because now the continent isn't just surviving, it's setting the tone. New banks, new currencies, new media networks, African voices speaking directly to African people. No translation needed, no approval required. If you ask the average citizen in Bamako, in Bissau, or in Bujumbura whether America matters like it once did, many would shrug, not because they don't care, but because they've learned not to count on ghosts. That's what the US has become in many parts of Africa. A memory, not a presence. A warning, not a promise. And while Western think tanks still debate how to re-engage, Africa is already 10 steps ahead, writing new deals, building new coalitions, launching new platforms. The momentum is irreversible. The change is permanent. And the lesson is clear. If you want a seat at the table, show up and stay. Otherwise, don't be surprised when the table moves without you. We want to hear what you think. Should the US be allowed to return to Africa's strategic affairs? Or is it too late? Share your thoughts below and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a moment of this unfolding transformation. Africa didn't ask for this moment. It earned it. After decades of being told what to do, how to develop, who to trust, and when to act, the continent has finally reached a tipping point. And Ibrahim Traoré is part of that new generation that's saying no more. No more waiting, no more dependency, no more partnerships based on fear or favors. Instead, it's now about dignity, direction, and doing things differently. And while the West struggles to keep up, Africa is already building what comes next. The media doesn't always show it, but the shift is real. African youth are building apps, starting businesses, questioning old ideologies, and looking inward for strength. They're connecting across borders faster than ever. And they're not asking for validation, they're setting the pace. In the past, major global actors assumed Africa was a region to shape. Now they are realizing Africa is a force to reckon with. And at the center of this is a truth the old powers refuse to accept. Africa is no longer a proving ground for foreign experiments. It's a home for African ideas. The days when Washington could send in a delegation, wave a flag, and expect loyalty, those days are gone. Because loyalty without respect is not sustainable. That's what Traoré understood. His approach was never about confrontation, it was about clarity. If aid comes with disrespect, we will find new tools. If troops come with conditions, we will train our own. If trade comes with exploitation, we will cut new deals. And that clarity spread. It showed up in speeches in Niger, in negotiations in Guinea, in town halls in Chad. Suddenly, leaders who once whispered about independence are now shouting it from the podium. This is not noise, this is awakening. But don't mistake that awakening for chaos. It is calculated, it is thoughtful, and yes, it is challenging old assumptions. America believed its influence would last forever. But influence isn't permanent. It's earned through consistency, through humility, through presence. And that's where the U.S. fell short. Traoré did not rise because America failed. He rose because his people saw the need for something real, something rooted, something their own. That is the foundation upon which Africa is now building. Schools no longer modeled only on Western systems, but tailored to local needs. Banks that prioritize regional trade. Security alliances that answer to no capital but their own. It's a renaissance hidden in plain sight, and yet many in the West are still asking the wrong question. How did we lose Africa? The truth is they never had it. They borrowed it, rented its loyalty, invested just enough to keep the illusion alive. But Africa was watching, learning, and preparing. So when the support dried up, the plans were already underway. Traoré isn't a disruption to the system. He is the result of it, a system that ignored local voices until those voices took the microphone. And now the question is no longer what will Africa do? It's who will listen? Who will sit at the table without demanding to sit at the head? Who will show up and stay even when the cameras turn off? Those are the real allies Africa wants. And if America can't be that, others will. It is not personal. It is strategic. The board has shifted. The players have changed. And the game, Africa is no longer a piece on the board. It is one of the hands that moves the pieces. We want your thoughts on this. Is Africa finally stepping into its rightful place on the global stage? What does this new leadership mean for the world? Drop a comment and don't forget to subscribe. There's more to this story than you think. Here's the part nobody wants to admit. Africa doesn't need saving. It never did. What it needed was space. Space to grow, to lead, to make mistakes and learn from them. Space to write its own story. And now that story is being written, not in foreign newsrooms, but in local languages, in dusty village schools, in crowded marketplaces, and in parliaments where leaders like Ibrahim Traoré speak not to please outsiders, but to empower their own. That is the revolution the cameras keep missing. Not one of blood, but of belief. Belief that sovereignty means nothing if it can be revoked by a tweet. Belief that development isn't progress if it doesn't reach the people. Belief that leadership isn't real unless it answers to the land it stands on. America once had the tools to be a partner in that belief, but it lost something along the way: humility. It became too used to leading from the front, speaking first, listening last. And Traoré's rise exposed that imbalance. He never declared war on the West. He simply stopped waiting for it. While Washington debated strategy, he built schools. While diplomats argued over language, he spoke directly to farmers, soldiers, and students. And while foreign policy experts warned about Russian influence or Chinese investment, he focused on what his people actually needed: security, pride, dignity. This is why Traoré's popularity spreads beyond Burkina Faso, because he reminds Africans that they are enough. Not in spite of the past, but because of what they've survived. For centuries, this continent was shaped by foreign hands. Now it's shaping itself. That transformation is messy, it's imperfect, but it's real, and it's powerful. And here's what matters: it's irreversible. Across Africa, new institutions are forming: regional banks, digital trade platforms, Pan-African think tanks. These aren't dreams, they are decisions. Strategic, intentional, forward-looking. And they are happening with or without America. The U.S. can no longer afford to think of Africa as an optional chapter in its global playbook. It is the stage, the test, the opportunity, and the warning. Because what happens when a continent no longer needs outside permission? What happens when it stops looking for approval and starts building power? The answer is already unfolding. You see it in new satellite programs in Nigeria, in clean energy projects in Rwanda, in military coordination from Bamako to Niamey. These are not signs of fragmentation. They are signals of focus. And Traoré understands the signal better than most. His government is not perfect, but it is accountable to its people, not to Paris, to its security needs, not to old alliances, to its future, not its past. That's the difference. And that's why, even if Washington were to return tomorrow with offers of aid and cooperation, the answer might still be, we're doing fine. Because this time, Africa knows it can. And that knowledge, that belief, is what changes everything. You can take away troops, you can cut off funding, but once the people believe in themselves, there's no turning back. Are we witnessing the start of a new world order, or the end of an old illusion? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe in this new voice of Africa, subscribe now and stay with us as we follow the road ahead. Once upon a time, Africa was treated like a guest at the global table, expected to be grateful for the leftovers, silent during the main course, and obedient when asked to clear the dishes. But that time is over, because Africa has built its own table. And this time, it doesn't come with a seat labeled United States. That's the final twist to this story. The door didn't close on Trump. Trump closed it on himself. He believed that disengagement would look like strength, that by walking away, the world would come chasing. But the world moved on. Africa moved on. While he focused on shrinking maps and campaign slogans, the continent expanded its imagination. And Ibrahim Traoré, he didn't wait for permission to act. He stepped forward when others stepped back. That's what leadership looks like when it's rooted in responsibility, not recognition. He reminded his people that independence isn't a holiday. It's a habit, a daily choice to stand tall, to speak truth, to reject compromise that comes with chains. Now, many in the West still wonder, can the U.S. return? Can it rebuild trust? The answer isn't simple, because the terms have changed. If America wants back in, it must listen before it speaks. It must show up and stay even when the spotlight fades. It must trade control for cooperation. And most importantly, it must respect that Africa has changed. It is no longer the continent of dependency. It is the continent of decision. That doesn't mean closing doors. It means opening new ones on equal ground. But is the West ready for that kind of relationship? Traoré didn't wait to find out. He moved forward, and his people followed. Not because of fear, but because of faith. Faith that they can define their future, that they can fight their battles, that they can build something better. And they are, slowly, boldly, with stumbles and setbacks, but always forward. This isn't the end of Africa's story, it's just the beginning. Because across this continent, from Cairo to Cape Town, from Dakar to Dar es Salaam, a new voice is rising, one that no longer whispers, one that no longer waits. It speaks in the language of freedom, of unity, of legacy. And if the world listens, it will hear something powerful, not a plea, but a promise that Africa is not just rising, it's arriving. So now we turn to you. What do you see when you look at Ibrahim Traoré? A threat, a rebel, or a reminder that dignity can't be delayed and destiny doesn't wait for permission? Tell us what you think in the comments. Let your voice be part of this moment. And if this story has moved you, even just a little, subscribe to our channel. Share this video, because what's happening in Africa right now isn't just politics, it's history in motion. And history, when it rises, doesn't ask who's ready. It simply arrives.